Rangers fans, welcome to Liberty Blue, the essential New York Rangers podcast. I'm Andrew Chelney. That's Nick Zararis. And Nick, the second best dressed man in New York City, Michael Peca, is off to Chicago to be an assistant under new head coach Jeff Blashill.
The big thing here, and you and I have talked about this a lot over the last few, I would say, months at this point, and there are a number of guys you could say this about, both players on the team, and we also had said this about Dan Muse as well. You knew you had decreasing probabilities of making the playoffs with each passing game from, let's say, middle of February through the end of the regular season. And instead of trying to learn more about guys you had, whether that was Zach Jones, whether that was Calvin DeHaan, whether that was Michael Peca or Dan Muse or Juuso Parssinen, they didn't do any of that. And they stubbornly kept running out a lineup that had major holes. They added to it in getting Carson Soucy when they did. And I don't want to say they wasted the last 20 games of the regular season, but they didn't gain anything out of that. And yes, their goal was to try and make the playoffs, no matter how fleeting their chances of actually doing that were. But at the same time, it's a missed opportunity. And I think that's what's so annoying about that last 15 to 20 games. And everybody wants to make excuses for everyone involved. Well, Laviolette's in charge of the lineup, not the general manager. Well, the general manager can fire the coach and make somebody else make the lineup he wants to play. Well, the coach doesn't have to do what the GM wants. Well, if he doesn't, the GM can get rid of him. Well, Drury didn't want to talk to him. Well, if you're an adult at a job and you're so frustrated with someone else that you go nonverbal and stop communicating with them, that's unprofessional. Like, you're getting paid how many millions of dollars to be the GM and president of the hockey team, and you're so frustrated with a subordinate of yours, you're refusing to talk to him like a middle schooler? Like, I don't understand how the conversation around the general manager and, frankly, the team since they've been eliminated from the playoffs hasn't been, wow, they really have a bad job. They are doing a really bad job of doing the nuts and bolts. Like, you can put together a good team, and if the results aren't there, the results aren't there. That's a different conversation. But this is kind of simple stuff, like communicating with your coworkers, using games as an incubator to try and figure out answers, because you gave Parssinen a 2-year contract, and you have no idea if he's actually a useful NHL player or not. This is somebody who was healthy scratched by 3 separate teams at various points last year, is 25 years old, and getting to the point where the Swedish league or the Swiss league might be calling after the next contract if it doesn't work out for him on this stint. But those last 20 games didn't need to be meaningless, is I think what's so frustrating about it, because you had opportunities. You could have given Dan Muse or Michael Peca 10 games as the interim head coach. If you were so mad at Peter Laviolette you didn't want to talk to him, why'd you keep him? Why'd you keep him around for the last 10 to 15 games? It's really frustrating when you have opportunities to even make marginal improvements, or at least an attempt at marginal improvements, and you don't pursue them.
Well, we talked about this at the time where you knew the team, either wasn't making the playoffs or it was a very big long shot to make the playoffs. And, we were talking about how, well, you should use the last 10, 15 games to essentially just experiment with stuff, try new things. And one of the biggest highlights too is, on top of the Michael Peca stuff, on top of the Parssinen stuff, is Matthew Robertson's 24 years old and hasn't played in the NHL.
Nope.
And we don't know what he is. And at this point, he's 24 with 7, 8 defensemen up at the NHL level, and no one knows what he could be. Even teams that might be interested in Matthew Robertson in a potential buy low situation, they don't know what he's capable of. And one of the problems is that not only did the Rangers not, at least try to see what he can do, they made it harder for him to do that by trading for Soucy and giving a 5-year extension to Will Borgen and all these guys. Like, at the end of the day, when you are not making the playoffs, trying to do the same things that you were doing when you were making the playoffs that already weren't working, I don't want to say it's a waste of time, but like, I don't really know how to describe it in any other way. Like, one of the things too is over the last 15 games or so, the power play was a disaster fire. Nothing was happening, and yet every game the question to Peter Laviolette was, "Okay, so you changing anything?" And his answer was, "Nah." And like that's really the key to one of the biggest frustrations with last season in particular. When things weren't going well, nothing changed, and when things were too dire at that, when things were essentially off a cliff and you couldn't change anything if you really wanted to, you still didn't really see what was out there. If you knew like the only spin zone I have in my head to not fire Peter Laviolette early is they knew they were going to hire Mike Sullivan, or at least to the best of their ability without tampering, I should say. That they had some inclination that Mike Sullivan was going to be available. And at that point, it was like, okay, well, we're just going to ride Laviolette into the sunset and let him go, and then bring in Mike Sullivan 7 seconds after that. That's like the only thought process I can see that would at least like sort of explain why they didn't fire Laviolette in season. But even then, at least see what Muse has as a head coach. At least see what Michael Peck has as a head coach. Just figure out what you have, and they go. It goes back to what you talked about. They don't really know what they have in Parson, and like Zach Jones is in 1 week and then out the next four and then back in the next three games. Like there's no continuity with trying things out.
The decision making, yeah, there's no
And
continuity or
that
logic.
right. And that was one of the biggest frustrations of this past season is okay, well, the season's over. It's March and there's like you're not making the playoffs, or you're trying your best and it's clearly like it's not working out and you're not trying to do anything differently. And yet the desire to say, okay, well, we want Parson in here. We should play him. There wasn't any of that until like game 81, which at that point it's too late, buddy. Like I don't know how to. It's a little it's a little bit too late.
And it didn't need to be that way. That's the biggest frustration is those 10 to 15 games ultimately ended up being meaningless. But at the very least, you had an opportunity to figure some things out. The conjecture coming out of the regular season is now, okay, well, now they kind of understand Mika Zibanejad is probably going to have to be a right wing if they want him to be effective going forward. That is an example of trying something, getting evidence, and at the very least, you have a baseline now. You understand what one of the potential outcomes is and a range of outcomes there. And that addresses, okay, well, now we don't need to go out and get a top six wing. We need to go out and get a third line center, but it's probably easier to go get a third line center than a top six wing. I think you could say the same thing as far as the Susie experiment of, okay, we played him a few games. He was atrocious. We sat him for a few games. He drew back in. The results were a little bit better, but they still weren't very good. That's what I mean as far as getting an answer and knowing. And after the two games they won, the back-to-back shutouts, they won the game against Nashville, and I forget who the other game was, but they won the two
The
straight.
Islanders.
Yeah, they won the two straight shutouts
With Calvin DeHaan, Rangers legend.
And we came on the show that Monday and talked about the idea that, okay, you have the veterans who have been disrespected and written off, that nobody thinks they can do this, that the season's over. And you have all the young guys who are desperate for playing time, who want to prove they belong here. That is the type of narrative you could talk me into as far as how they could have made that last month of the season exciting, competitive, whatever. And instead, they never really got there. They never got to that air of desperation that they needed to. And they had a month of what were effectively playoff games. And they continually failed to have an attention to detail or a commitment to a high enough level of effort to make what we had said about, the young guys trying to play their way into the lineup consistently for the next season. I mean, that last 15, 20 games, that was your Brett Berard audition. Why wasn't he in the lineup all 20 games to see if he's going to be on the fourth line next year to start the season? Because we've been saying this now for 2-3 weeks. They already have too many guys for the 18 skater spots they're going to have available for them in the fall. And they're going to need to add to this group as well. And I know there will be trades, at least a few, to move some of the logjam out and create more space. But at the same time, Wouldn't it have been nice to know what Brendan Othman was with 28 more games of NHL
Sure.
experience, what Brett Berard was? Why couldn't you get Matt Rempe up from 9 minutes a game to 12 minutes a game? Like, you needed
Give
there
Adam
were,
Sikora a spin at that point. Like,
yeah,
might just try. Like, just see what they can do. Because you don't know. You don't know what Rempe looks like in a more prominent role. You don't know what Othman or Berard look like in a more prominent role. You don't know what Matthew Robertson looks like. You don't know what, Sikora or Ty Emery or whoever. Like, you don't know any of these people. And the biggest problem too is that like you have 35 players for 18 spots and on a team that didn't make the playoffs.
yeah.
So like there's no space for guys that need space on a team that didn't make the playoffs. That's I don't know. Like I think that's not good. I hate to this is breaking news over here. Special report. That's not good.
That's the old Bill Parcells quote where if you have two quarterbacks, you don't have one quarterback. That's kind of where the Rangers are at right now. If you've got, seven third pair defensemen, you probably don't have two. If you
Yeah,
felt the
yeah.
need to have seven of them, you probably don't have two you feel good about. You could say the
That
same
means you
thing.
don't trust the ones that you have.
Exact. And you could say the same thing about the bottom six, where they have probably 10 guys for six spots. And, Carrick's getting one because he signed the 3-year contract. You assume that Othman/Perot is getting one because those are two former first round picks. You
Oh, I
assume,
forgot. I forgot the Rangers healthy scratching Gabe Perreault.
and Brendan
Oh,
Othman
uh,
scratching both of them, and
yeah,
that with a 1% chance of
incredible,
making the playoffs. Well, he's got to sit.
incredible.
He's got to sit with the coaches who are
Yeah,
going to
and
teach
watch
him
them.
to sit with the coaches who aren't going to be here.
Right.
It just, and that was really what started to irk me towards the end of the year, because I think we were pretty reasonable as far as being ideologically consistent throughout the course of the season, that it wasn't Peter Laviolette's fault the team was so bad. But as the season went along, he did more and more to make it clear he didn't particularly care that he wasn't improving the situation. He wasn't making things better. And with like 2-3 weeks left in the season, I basically said, I don't really have empathy for when he gets fired for how this goes, because he had ample opportunities to try anything, whether it's what we're saying, auditioning younger guys and playing them more just to figure out what they are. Because, and we know this, that the best interests of a GM or a coach aren't always in the best interest of what's in line with the team, which is very clear. Laviolette was coaching to try and make the playoffs, even though it was, 5% chance with 10 games to go. And Chris Drury very clearly had his eyes on Mike Sullivan and didn't particularly care how the last 15 games of the regular season went. So it's just really frustrating, because those last 15 games did not need to be meaningless. They did not need to be Sisyphus rolling the ball up the hill. There was an opportunity there for some of these guys who might be on the team next year or might not be on the team next year to get an opportunity to figure out what they are. And generally, that's a thing that teams recognize there's a responsibility to do, because you need information. You can't make these decisions on these guys based on just what their pedigree is. And I do think that might be an issue for the Rangers because of some of the guys they've targeted, like Vakanainen and Borgen, who, were first round picks a number of years ago, where, well, I forget whose tweet it is, but something along the lines of, if the first words in the tweet are former first round pick, the player's turbo dog shit. I mean, if all you've got is they were a first round pick when Obama was president, or the first Trump term, and they have like 200 NHL games played 8 years later, that's not really a ringing endorsement of the talent that, yeah, we liked him 8 years ago, so we wanted to get him. I mean, that was always, the Rangers always do that. They always, whenever they acquire someone, they're always like, we've wanted him forever. Whether it was Ryan Strome, who, had done basically nothing to that point in the NHL when they traded Ryan Spooner for him. They did the same thing with Trouba. Well, we've wanted him since his draft year, and we finally got around to getting him here. It's great you liked the guy 6 years ago. Have you watched him play in the last 6 years? Do you understand what's happened in those 6 years
They
that you're
like
going to?
have the draft notes like in a corner somewhere, and they have to like dust it off. They're like,
Yeah,
poof,
that
like
because
they gotta blow all the cobwebs off, and they gotta take a look. It's like, dog, like I don't know if you know this, but he's played NHL games since then.
and it's one of those things where these are opportunities for improvement. We know the Rangers are not great with their talent development, and they're not great at turning draft picks into players. I mean, Othman was Drury's first draft pick as general manager at the helm of the organization, and he's got 20 NHL games under his belt 4 years later. And look, some of that is a byproduct of the environment. You know, he lost a year and a half of his development because of COVID, and they shut down the junior hockey seasons. He suffered the pretty rough injury back in the fall. That's really what stinks for him in particular, is that if he doesn't get hurt in November, December, whatever it was in Hartford, he probably gets called up relatively early in the season and gets more of an opportunity to try and play and to try and stick. Because now you're going to go into next season with Othman, Perreault, Berard, Rempe, Parsonen, maybe Edstrom by like November, December, depending on his knee. You're going to have 7 or 8 guys pushing for 6 spots, and you don't know who should get any of them, basically, because you just don't have enough information other than Sam Carrick. And you're going to assume that if Chris Kreider and Panarin are on the team next year, Will Cooley by default is the third line left wing, because they're not going to play him over Zibanejad. They might play him over Lafreniere, but you're going to assume he's going to end up, at least at the start of the year, on the third line. And he was your most effective player, and you're going to use a guy less than you probably should because of the logjam. And I do think that's probably the biggest priority right now as far as what the next month or so look like for the Rangers going into the draft. You got to clear this logjam. You got too many guys for not enough spots, and you got difficult decisions to make.
Well, that's the thing, is there's way too many cooks in the kitchen for what they're trying to do. Like the kitchen right now is, it's a hole in the wall, but you have 38 chefs in there trying to make something. It's like, wait a minute, hold on a second. Like you got to clear these people out so that somebody can make something. Otherwise, everybody's going to stay on top of each other and nothing's going to get done. Like this is where the Rangers are right now, and I would have to imagine that Drury is going to be busy come the draft, especially to maybe move some guys out and maybe flip for assets, and then use those assets to get somebody that could slide into the middle, like trade essentially 3 players for a pick or something, and then use that pick to turn into one player that is essentially the sum of those 3 combined. I could see some of that going on. Drury is going to be busy, and there's going to be a lot of conversation, sure, but a lot of math involved here, because not only do the Rangers need to move players out, they need to make space for money, right? Kendra Miller needs a new contract. Shesterkin's extension is going to kick in here. Like there's money that needs to be freed up for the Rangers to do everything they want to do. Well, what better way to do that when you have guys that are either not making the team, or there are too many spots. There's 10 people fighting for 3 spots. You're going to have to trade some of them out to at least get a little bit of that space back. So Drury's going to be busy. It would be shocking to me if the Rangers weren't one of the more active teams, especially around the draft. Free agency might be a little bit different, but I think Drury and co, and maybe Mike Sullivan, now that he's, here, will be very, very proactive, especially at the draft, to acquire as much space and maybe picks as possible.
You think they have someone sitting down furiously taking notes, watching Josh Hart rebound and saying, do that over and over again to people on the Rangers? Because it seems like you need guys like that. I don't know. Intensity.
Love Josh Hart. What a guy.
Look, Josh Hart does have games where all he does is just run around out there and he's not doing a whole lot. But on the nights where it works, like last night, you start
that
just not
at the end of the game. I mean, that won them the game, because my man's is like 6'5", I think.
6'5",
and he's jumping over 7-foot guys, grabbing, critically important rebounds. And he secured that last rebound to win the game for the Knicks in Game 3. Like, this is the kind of energy and I don't want to say desire, because like every
athlete wants
athlete wants it. Everybody, the idea that like athletes don't try, or like that's ridiculous. But like Josh Hart has that extra level of, I am going to do this whether or not like anybody's in my way. I'm barreling through 8 players, and this ball is mine. The Rangers need that kind of player.
And one thing I was talking about on a Saturday night, because I was out and the Panthers were playing the Hurricanes. It was 2-1. I went to the bathroom. I came back out. It was 5-1. And I looked up. I was like, what happened? And my friend just shrugged and said, Florida. And yeah, there's a degree of inevitability to the way the Panthers play. And I think you can look at that Carolina Florida series as a really good microcosm of the difference between talent, mindset, intensity, because Carolina and Florida play relatively similar styles where they're very aggressive forechecking teams. They dump and chase a lot. They really try and outwork you. But you see the difference because Florida has the high end talent, and their high end talent plays with that ferocity, that tenaciousness, and in some cases, the violence and dirtiness you need this time of year to be able to make plays happen for yourself. And it's not that Carolina's bad. You know, Carolina's consistently top 5, top 10 in the NHL and most of the key metrics. They win a lot of regular season games. But you see the limitations when your star players don't have that drive and they don't play that style of hockey. And that really jumped out at me in the conference finals last year, where it was guys like Barclay Goodrow and Alex Wenberg being the ones to make plays happen for the Rangers. And Zibanejad and Kreider were having a miserable time trying to get from defense to offense because they could really only create in transition. They're not that great off of the cycle. And part of the problem for the Rangers, and this has been a problem forever. You could go back to the previous regime under Glenn Sather and Jeff Gorton too. They have too many guys who do the same thing. Part of the reason some of these teams are able to separate the deeper they get in the playoffs is they have lines who are all capable of playing in slightly different ways. It's really jumped out to me with the way the Oilers have played, especially in the last 2 weeks or so, is that their depth lines are really dump and chase heavy, but their star players are effective in transition and absorbing pressure and eating hits. And the Rangers have a lot of guys who all play relatively similar styles. And frankly, like we've been saying, don't have that Matthew Tkachuk, I'm going to get below the goal line, I'm going to eat 2 cross checks in my lower back, and I'm going to hold this net front position as long as I can because I know the puck's going to get here. And do the Rangers have guys who can do that in spurts? Yeah, they have guys who can do that in spurts. But you are seeing the difference between star players and then star players who play the type of hockey that's conducive to success in the postseason. I think you can never have too much talent, but the Rangers have too much of the same type of talent. And I know, and I hate saying that because that's what the on the record narrative is about why they lost to the Devils 2 years ago. Well, they got too many skill guys, even though the problems with that team were entirely defensive and they could not play defense to save their lives. But the prevailing narrative from that series is Adam Fox was terrible. The Rangers outscored the Devils in Adam Fox's minutes in that series. And they had too many skill players and not enough finesse because peg leg Patrick Kane was too much skill for the Rangers. A guy with one hip and Tarasenko at 32 years old. That was too much skill. You can't win with that. Not like the Stars play Wyatt Johnston on the third line. Not like you can have good players on the fourth line too. I know. And that's something that has driven me crazy my entire life is, well, you can't play good players on the fourth line. Teams don't play good players on the fourth line because they can't afford it. If you have
Right.
guys who don't make enough money, who are cheap, you could play good players on the fourth line. The
If
Stars,
you can't play good players on the fourth line, then what are the like are the Olympics just going to have Ryan Reeves on the fourth line? Like is that what we're doing? Are they is the fourth line going to be like Barclay Goodrow, like Matt Rempe and Ryan Reeves? Is that like is that what it's going to be for like the Olympics have like superstar fourth liners. And I understand that, like the conversations for the Olympics a little bit different, but like the idea remains is that if there is a world in the NHL in which you can play Sidney Crosby on the fourth line because your team is that good, and I know he doesn't play fourth line in the Olympics, just for the sake of conversation, like you can every team would do that. They can't because the cap exists and also team building, like it's even in the MLB, right? Like there's yeah, I guess like the Dodgers are the closest team to all world superstar lineup that you would get, but like even then, right? There's still there's still holes that you can find on these rosters. You get the best players you possibly can in the NHL with this money that you are allotted to build the team. The idea that you can't play good players on the fourth line is completely asinine. Like if your fourth line is so good that it can dominate your opponent's third line or like sometimes even your second line, that's a Stanley Cup team. That's the whole point. Like and the conversation too about, okay, the Josh Harts of the NHL and all that, it's a little bit different in basketball because there's basketball players don't change after 45 seconds, right? Like so Josh Hart's impact is more measurable as a single player because he's one of the five on the court and he is out there for long stretches of the game. Whereas in the NHL, you can overpay for Sam Bennett if you so choose, but that's one guy. The idea of being a team like Florida where they are at your throat for every second of every game, they are relentless. That is a team mindset. Everybody has to buy in. That's why Florida plays as well as they do, because Paul Maurice has drilled into every player's heads the way that he wants them to play, and they have all bought in, and this is the result. These conference finals have not been fun
No.
on either side, really, except for game one of Edmonton and Dallas. These conference finals have been miserable. As a fan of none of these teams, like it's just as a hockey fan, these have been miserable because it's just blowouts. There's no tension. There's no overtime. Like, I know if you're an Oilers fan, you're loving this. If you're a Panthers fan, you're enjoying this. But if you're a hockey fan, you're watching these games and you're going like, this is not fun. Like this is not fun. But for their sake, it doesn't matter if we think it's fun or not, because they're destroying their opponents, and that's all they need to do to get to the Stanley Cup final. So like, you need a team thought process of, okay, if this is how we want to play, if we want to be relentless, it has to be from 1 to 12 all the way down, and not just, oh, we're going to throw money at Sam Bennett. He's going to change the culture. Yeah, that's how you get
Because that's
Sam
how that
Bennett.
works.
That's how you get Sam Bennett to score like 50 points, making $10 million a year. That's not going to do much for you.
And again, that speaks to what we had said before about not understanding what makes players successful. I vividly remember tweeting it. I wrote it in a column in the summer of 2021 when they acquired Barclay Goodrow. They are going to get him, and they are going to be mystified why they don't have a third line as good as Tampa Bay's. It was the most obvious thing imaginable that they were going to overpay for guys who did not produce counting stats because they were chasing intangibles. And over time, Kurt Sturry himself figured out, wow, intangibles don't score goals. They help. They're good on the day-to-day basis. But when you line up across from a team that's better than you would rather try and close that talent gap than have good rah-rah guys in the locker room. And one last thing on this. The Dallas Stars have been playing Evgeny Dodonov on their fourth line for most of this regular season. That's a guy who can score 20 goals. Don't tell me you can't play good players on the fourth line, because most teams can't afford to. That's the obvious caveat here. And that's why generally guys who play lower in the lineup have more generalized skill sets. And we're going to dump and chase the puck in. We're going to play low event hockey, and we're going to try and grind these games to a halt so that by the time the big boys come back over the boards, we're going to be able to do a little bit more. And instead, and I was reading, I forget whose column it was. I was reading it during the week last week, but making the argument that hockey, unlike basketball, is a weak link sport, meaning it matters more that if you have the worst player out there at a given time than it does having the best player, because the worst player in hockey stands out a lot more in those high leverage, high impact situations. And I think you can make a real strong case for that based on what we've seen, especially through a Ranger centric lens, where I've made the joke more than once that if they had made the Stanley Cup final last year, paying Trouba and Gaudreau almost $12 million combined would have been one of the most impressive feats of the salary cap era, because those guys are net negatives. And to be a net negative in a playoff where you had like a 25% shooting percentage like Gaudreau did, to be outscored is just crazy. But hockey is a weak link sport, and you are watching it very directly between these two series. And it creates a sense of, I don't want to say dread, but you never feel comfortable when you're out there if you're Carolina right now, because Florida feels inevitable. Florida feels like it doesn't matter if Carolina scores first. It doesn't matter if it's 2-0, 3-0, because Florida sneaks up on you like a heart attack. Like I said, it was 2-1. I went to the bathroom. I came back. It was 5-1. It happens that fast. And yeah, the line was long to get into the bathroom. That's probably why they scored 3 goals in that 10 minutes. But still, when you have games like that where Carolina got off to a reasonable start and has been off to reasonable starts in these games, but Florida, once they get you, and the Rangers can attest to this, even though the series was closer last year than it's been with Carolina so far, it's been really, really eye opening and illuminating the gap. I mean, every time I watch the Oilers and the Stars, I'm thinking, I sat through almost 70 games of Will Borgen and Ryan Lindgren and there are teams who get to do this. There are teams like the Oilers who are going to have to make a conscious decision of, well, Ekholm is healthy. So that means we need to take out either Troy Stetcher or Darnell Nurse. And we know Nurse probably isn't coming out. It'll be Stetcher. But like Stetcher would have been like the third best defenseman on the Rangers this year. And that's a guy who's been a seventh defenseman for almost his entire life.
That's the crux of the problem, where the Rangers, I mean, we've talked about this so many times, where the Rangers like don't really understand how to identify what makes a good defenseman. And this has been a problem for like 25 years. This is not a new problem. This is not a uniquely Drury problem, because the same thing happened when the Rangers made the Cup final in 2014, where it was Girardi, Stahl, and I think it was like Kevin Klein when he was still good. Like that, you go and rewatch those games. Girardi, Stahl, that pair was not good. Like even back then, like if the Rangers really wanted to go all in, if they really wanted to, for this, really make the best chance for themselves to go out there and win the Stanley Cup. I know Girardi's a good guy. I know Mark Stahl is a good guy from all intents and purposes, but you don't win Stanley Cups off of how many good guys you got. You win the Stanley Cup based off how good your team is, and if your team is good enough to score more goals than the other team. How great they are as people they don't count goals for that. So at the end of the day, the Rangers really have to figure out, okay, we like Carson Soucy as a person, but he was downright horrible in the games that he played here. We should do something about that. Because if you're just going to if you're going to keep 9 of these defensemen around because they're nice people, I hate to break it to you, but you're just not winning anything. And that's what teams that go for it, like they have to make that decision. You take a look at what Florida did. We go back to the Huberdeau trade. Huberdeau was really good for Florida, but Bill Zito looked around and said, if we want to win the Stanley Cup, this is what we have to do. And here we are, lo and behold, a cup final, and looking like another cup final appearance back to back to back. Right? Like there's obviously more moves involved in that, and and Bill Zito's done a really good job of handling that for Florida, but they have evaluated talent really well and seeing what works with Coach Paul Maurice well. And these things have really joined forces, and the gears are turning about as well as you possibly can in an NHL organization where turnover is, constant, not only every year, but even, every few months or so, especially during the trade deadline. That organization is running so well, and a lot of that has to do with player and talent evaluation. They saw, okay, this blue liner isn't good enough. We have to bring in somebody else, and they did. And the Rangers at times are very slow to that. And then they look around after everyone else has and say to themselves, "Oh, that didn't work." Yeah, if you had yes, thank you for noticing, but it's May 26th and you're not in the playoffs, and you didn't even make the playoffs. You've been watching hockey on TV for 6 weeks. Yeah, it's a little too late.
And one other thing off of this before we move on, think about it in terms of this. And I've made this comparison a few times over the last few months, but it's not just one thing to identify a player as deficient or like actively hurting the team, making you worse. Getting rid of them does help, but you also need to be striving to be better. And that's really been the Rangers' issue. and why I really don't particularly care it took Chris Drury 3 years to figure out that all the guys he brought in that first summer weren't particularly good, because you had ample opportunities to make things happen over the last 3 years. You burned 3 years of the prime of Fox and Shesterkin, your two best players, Panarin, your third best player. And now, yeah, sure, the salary cap's going up. Does anyone actually think Jack Eichel or Connor McDavid's getting to unrestricted free agent July 1st of next year?
Especially if Edmonton wins the cup this year. No, of course not.
That's the thing here. And
also, why would and honestly, let's zoom out for a second. I know we're Rangers fans and all that, but let's think critically for a second. Is Connor McDavid really going to leave Edmonton to come to the Rangers? I know as Rangers fans, obviously we would love that, and that would be terrific. And he the best player on the planet is going to play here, and that's all peaches and roses. But logically, realistically, let's turn off the console for a second and think to ourselves: is Connor McDavid really going to leave Edmonton to come to the Rangers? I mean, I don't know. I never say never with those things, but let's think critically for a second. Unless something catastrophic happens where there's a massive rift between those two, I don't see him ever leaving Edmonton. But that, I guess crazier things have happened.
And the other part of that is, so what? We're punting on the next year and a half? That we're going to wait for 2026?
From Wolves Credia.
I mean, yeah.
For the challenge. Yeah, you know what? Maybe McDavid does come here for the challenge. You're right.
I mean, that's a reasonable point. I mean, look, it won't take a lot. You win here as a Nick or a Ranger. I mean, the Knicks made the conference finals, and Jalen Brunson's never going to pay for a meal or a drink for the rest of his life.
Yeah.
And he also went out of his way, and he took a lot less money.
He took $113 million pay cut.
I don't skip the ads on the Roommates podcast for that reason. I got to make sure
they need the money.
I got to make sure the bills get paid for Brunson and Josh Hart. I do. But the last thing I wanted to touch on before we call it a show, when you're watching the playoffs and you're watching these great teams just barrel down and have that degree of, okay, we're going to withstand this, and then we're going to punch back the way the Oilers have, the way Florida has. And you think about how much it takes to go right this time of year for you. And then the other part of that is, if you're good enough, that old saying, you can make your own luck. The Oilers and the Panthers do that. They find themselves in these situations where Kasperi Kapanen wins a series for them and puts them into the conference finals after not playing the previous 13, 14 playoff games. The Florida Panthers, for the first two rounds, had Luosterainen leading their team in goals. Somebody who'd been, a top 9-ish forward, was on the fourth line in the conference finals for them last year. When you have games like that and you have everybody contributing at various points, you start to realize how much work there is to be done here. And that's really what I want to emphasize. And look, it would take a lot for them to be as bad as they were last year. Again, go next year. But don't say it's impossible. Do not say it's impossible, because you watch this defense and yes, will Mike Sullivan help, and will there be a new coach bump? Sure. Is that the difference between making and missing the playoffs? Probably. Like we've said, if they go 10-10 instead of 5-15, they make the playoffs. They finished, I think, 4 points out. That 5-win swing would have been 10. That would have gotten them in the last spot. Do I think they would have beat Washington? Probably not, but they would have been in, and we would have had a very different conversation. But when you are watching these teams like Dallas, like Florida, they're not waiting around. Same thing with the Oilers, and even Carolina in their series against Washington, you would make the same point. They're not hoping. They are making plays happen for themselves. It's not, let's get the puck to our best player in space and hope he makes something happen. Guys like McDavid just do that. It's not as conscious as when the Rangers are out there where, all right, get the puck to Panarin. He's going to skate through two guys in the neutral zone. He's going to gain the zone with speed. He's going to hit the brakes at the half wall, and he's going to try and hit the winger on the opposite side, crashing the back post. The Oilers play with a surgical type of precision where everybody's pulling in the same direction. The Rangers don't do that.
It is an organizational philosophy, and you know that because of the way that the Rangers structure their offense, where especially, when they were making the conference finals, the play was just hang on at 5-on-5, and we are going to rely on the officials to call penalties so that we can generate our offense. Whereas teams like Florida and Edmonton are saying, we're not relying on anything. We are going to make it ourselves. And this is why you're seeing so much sustained playoff success from these two teams right now is they are creating the opportunities for themselves to go out there and win these games. They're not waiting for officials. And, the Rangers love waiting for penalty calls, waiting for players to come here in free agency, oh, well, we'll just sign this player. Oh, maybe this player will become available and maybe they'll want to come here. Instead of, okay, well, we're going to trade for this player because he's the best, and we want this player because he's good, and it's we're not. Like power plays are great and all, but we should play better at 5-on-5 so that we can generate more penalties that way. Because if we're dominating at 5-on-5, the other team's gonna have to take more penalties, which creates power plays for us, which creates more goals, right? Et cetera, et cetera. The Rangers like to rely on outside forces to help them in these games. Teams like Florida and Edmonton are saying, we don't need that. We're going to do it ourselves. And that's why you're seeing them succeed right now.
They have what it takes. They have been amongst the NHL's best, and they have tinkered. They have tried to improve. When Florida was looking, I wouldn't say meh, but around the trade deadline when they were very clearly missing some guys, injuries, whatever, Bill Zito said, okay, what can I do to hold us over till we get to the playoffs and Kachuk comes back? Well, we can get Seth Jones with salary retained. We can get Brad Marchand with salary retained. And those guys fill needs. We need a first pair right-handed defenseman because Ekblad will be a free agent after this year, and Seth Jones can just do that going forward. And we probably won't be able to keep Marchand, but he's the best or second best winger available after the Rantanen trade. So let's go and see if we can make this work. It helps that Marchand only really wanted to go to the Panthers, but they have positioned themselves as the preeminent team in the NHL over the last 2 or 3 years through very shrewd moves. I mean, they won the President's Trophy, had Huberdeau finish, I think, second or third in Hart Trophy voting that year, and they lost in the playoffs, and I think the second round to Tampa Bay on Tampa Bay's way to winning a second straight cup. And they looked around and said, okay, we got to get better. Instead of saying, well, Jonathan Huberdeau's a great guy. He works so hard. He's so great in the community. I don't care. You need to win. The goal in professional sports is not to create a collective of good dudes. Unfortunately, being a good person and winning are not correlated in professional sports. It'd be nice if it was.
Be nice, yeah, it'd be great.
It'd be nice, but there isn't a correlation. It's not a moral failing to lose. It's not a moral success to win. But you got to have guys who can make things happen. And even speaking to what you were saying, the Rangers didn't generate enough power plays because they don't play a style that is conducive to creating power plays for themselves. They don't work a great cycle. They don't work high to low particularly well. They don't grind games out. And that's imperative if you're going to be a power play dependent team. Hell, look at the way the Oilers tweaked their lineup and their style over the last 12 to 14 months, where last year they were +1 for the entire playoffs and lost in 7. And this year they've had the best 5-on-5 goal differential, and their power plays 5-6% worse than it was last year. You can make improvements. It's not a linear, okay, we did this badly, let's get rid of this person. It's, well, we got rid of this person, let's try and do something else. And the other part I wanted to get in real quick, the Oilers signed Jeff Skinner and Victor Arvidsson within the first hour of free agency of July last year. Both those guys are getting healthy scratched. Does anyone have any belief that the Rangers would be doing the same thing with guys they signed the first day of free agency if push came to shove? Would they be healthy scratching, Brad Marchand for Brett Berard if Berard was playing better? Probably not. I'm gonna go out on a limb and say probably not. So you need to be willing to have those difficult conversations, to make those difficult decisions. And far too often the Rangers haven't. Why are we playing Blake Wheeler 4 months after breaking a leg in the conference finals against the fastest team in the NHL when he was already the slowest player in the NHL before he broke his leg? Like those little things of, well, he's going to give them a spark. But you could just play somebody who's better. Like it's the same conversation with Rempe.
A spark where? I mean, I guess he could spark the team post game when they lose. I guess I don't, because that's the thing is how can the slowest player in the sport give you a spark in the conference finals when he just came back from injury? He wasn't like even like playoff ready in terms of getting back into shape. And you're not in game shape unless you've played the entire season, essentially. Like being in game shape is very difficult to acquire to do, especially coming off of an injury. So like he's not in game shape. He's coming off of a serious injury. He was already one of the slowest players ever, like in the in the NHL, especially that season. And he's coming back from all of that with that all in mind, and you're going to turn around and say he's going to provide a spark, dog. Like it's like trying to light a lighter, but there's no fluid in there. Like I hate to break it to you, dog, but like there's no like all you're gonna get is some sparks, but the sparks don't get you to what you need to where you need to get. You're not getting the flame from the sparks if there's no lighter fluid in the lighter. That's like yeah, like that this is what we mean here. Where would Blake Wheeler get scratched? Like if Wheeler was healthy the whole season, let's say, but he clearly didn't have it in the playoffs, would he get scratched? The problem of it, like fundamentally, is that it takes more than an instantaneous time for me to say yes, you would get scratched. That therein lies the issue, where I have to sit there and think, would he? Would Goudreau get scratched? Would he? Would Trouba get scratched? I mean, we already know the answer to that. Like
Trouba on one leg.
yeah. Allegedly, he was totally healthy, though, according to Trouba himself. So that's, but
Yes, the same guy who says, "No, I was never getting traded to Detroit."
right,
Like we're
right,
like
of
we're
course.
stupid. Nevertheless, I digress.
Right.
At a certain point, when you start to think about these things critically, it's hard not to just rip your hair out. Like how much contempt we're treated with as the public. Like they can't just be honest with us; they have to BS us at all times. It's just at a certain point, man. It sucks. At a certain point, it's just an insult to your intelligence. I mean, I said it earlier and I'll say it again right now. Laviolette saying, yeah, we got to sit Osman and Perot so they can sit with the coaches and learn. Knowing we all know you're getting fired in 2 weeks. Like, we know you're not going to be here. We know that for a fact. And to just come out and say that is just, it's asinine. It's condescending. As much as my biggest hope is that there is some type of eureka moment here as far as just logic and decision making. Like the people making the decisions won't be able to directly make guys play better, but at least if there is logic and there is reason, I can understand it if I don't necessarily agree with it. That is my biggest hope.
Yeah, at the end of the day, I'd rather a direct decision than a whole bunch of hedging,
Yeah.
essentially. The Rangers cannot afford to hedge another season. Simply cannot. You can't, Adam Fox and Shesterkin and all these guys, they're only in their primes once.
Yep.
I don't, this is again, I'm breaking news here to on this podcast, but like these are prime time superstars. They are on your team. They are only going to be this young once. You cannot keep hedging these seasons away and expecting, lightning in a bottle with these marginal, changes and thinking, okay, well, this is going to be the year you win the cup. No, either you like, even if I might not agree with every move I might not even agree with every move that Edmonton makes or Florida makes, but the overall the decision that they made and the thought process led them to this point, and they have went all in on what they want to do, and it has worked out big time. No one was hedging. Neither team was hedging. Okay, well, we'll, do like a little bit of this, but we won't do that big trade. No, that's not how we want to operate things. No. Well, they did what they had to do and they're here. So unless you start doing that, you're going to see a whole lot of what we saw last season.
All right. That'll do it for this week's edition of the Liberty Blue podcast. Please be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, please drop a 5-star review. Thank you for the kind words there down there on the bottom.
Yep. for those listening, Dimitri put it in the YouTube chat. Great catching it live on a day off. Enjoy the podcast, and we appreciate you listening. We appreciate you watching. And I mean, hey, we'll be here next Monday as well.
Yeah, we'll be here through the summer. Well, it'll get interesting by mid-July when everyone in the NHL shuts down, except for us, because the content creators are the ones who actually keep the sport going, not the legacy media guys who tweet once a week and don't update anyone on any actual news.
This
is what it's about.
A point down emoji.
This is what it's all about. We'll talk to